Mortis Media.
In Emigrant, Montana, a village-sized town that has roughly 500 people, resides a large ranch house with a main floor, attic, remodeled into a bedroom, and an ancient basement. It's located just before the Mill Creek Bridge that crosses the Yellowstone River. It is a very large house with acres of land. My grandma and grandpa raised my dad and his sister Aunt Elle and their half-sister there. It was built in the late 1800s or early 1900s, and because it was a massive property with a barn and separate garage as well as multiple chicken coops and field for livestock or crops, naturally a few ranch hands had died on the property before they'd moved in. For an idea of what the house looks like, there's a large main floor consisting of 2 bathrooms, 4 bedrooms, a laundry room, and a huge kitchen. Up the stairs, which is down a lengthy hall from the living room, led up to only one room. I think it used to be an ordinary attic back in the day, but when my dad grew up there, it had already been remodeled into a bedroom. This was my Aunt Elle's bedroom. I've talked to Aunt Elle before about her bad experiences in the house, mostly occurring in her solitary attic. She told me she had suffered from terrible screaming night terrors often, and even as a teenager, refused to sleep up there and instead slept on a mattress in the living room with my grandma. She once described one of her night terrors to me. In her dream, she was being pinned to her bed in the attic, unable to move, surrounded by numerous human-like figures in red robes. To me, this sounded like sleep paralysis, but she was thrashing around and screaming in her sleep, so it couldn't have been. Aunt Elle was pretty scared after that experience, and my grandma brought a small crucifix for her to wear as a necklace. They were somewhat religious, Catholic, and attended a local church, but usually just my Aunt Elle and grandma would go. The rest of the family didn't seem to care about religion. But while wearing the crucifix, she found that the night terrors stopped, even while sleeping in her haunted room. She said it made a huge difference, and she was finally able to feel almost safe in her room, and everything was getting better. Aunt Elle doesn't know how, but she misplaced the necklace a few years later, and almost immediately, the terrible dreams and restless nights came back. It became so bad that apparently they had an exorcism, even though that might not be the correct term, because only certain priests are licensed by the Vatican to perform real exorcisms, but I'd call this a Montana village version of an exorcism. My grandma called on members of the church asking for help after she became increasingly concerned with Aunt Elle's behavior, among other strange happenings around the house, like cupboards opening, objects moving, and strange noises. Many church members came to the house, including the pastor, and some drove for hours away to participate. They all stood in a circle in the living room and held hands, praying and attempting to rid the house of whatever was haunting it and the family. Aunt Elle says some people even started speaking in tongues. I find that part personally hard to believe, but I love and trust my aunt, and I'd like to believe it happened. Even with sage burning and crucifixes hung up on doors and a group of devout Catholics holding hands and chanting, the demonic spirits never left the house. The Montana-made exorcism had failed. There wasn't much my grandma could do. They were not allowed to leave the house, so they tried to live with it. Not long after the exorcism of the house, my Aunt Elle remembered her old crucifix working for her, and soon brought another one, almost identical to the first one she wore. Again, the hauntings and odd sleep behaviors calmed down, until they eventually grew up and moved out. The house was kept in the family, but everyone went their separate ways. They might have rented the place out for a while through the late 80s and 90s. I'm not sure why. Fast forward about 15 years, right before I was born. My dad, mum, and older brother, who was only 1 at the time, got permission from the family to rent the house and moved in to run their horse and glass etching business from home. It was a beautiful spot to raise kids, right on the Yellowstone, with so much to entertain us. I was born in 1998 and lived at that house for about 6 years. I only have memories through the ages of 4 to 6 in that house, and my brother was 6 to 8 and has even better memories than I. My parents told us countless stories after we moved out and grew older. We all remember how creepy it felt living there, and we all agreed it was haunted. Once I no longer used a crib, I got my own bed and room. My room was next to the kitchen, but my brother was really far away on the other end of the house. I hated the way my room felt, so I played in my brother's room a lot. The main floor was honestly massive and really sketched out, like a maze almost, especially for a 5-year-old. My parents took the attic room for privacy. My dad told me that shortly after moving in, and while I was too young to know what was happening, the night terrors began. My mum was sleeping in the living room on a futon alone at first most nights, which wasn't out of the ordinary, because my dad would snore so loud that she couldn't sleep through it. She later admitted she couldn't stand the vibe coming from that room anyway. My brother and I always had nightmares. I especially had terrifying ones about the house itself that I will never forget. We rarely slept in our rooms, which is normal for kids of that age, and eventually it got to the point where every night we slept by our mum on the futon. Our own rooms gave us the creeps, and our parents knew it and never once questioned it. I know my brother and I were not scared to sleep alone, just scared to sleep alone in that house. The whole property gave off a creepy feeling, but we just felt safest together. My dad still slept there alone, in the same attic where his sister had experienced a repetitive demonic presence 20 years prior. I know he remembers living in that house as a kid, so I'll never understand why he stayed in that room. Most nights, he would get night terrors and scream so loud we could hear it downstairs, down the hall, and in the living room. I could tell it scared my mum too, although she handled it well. He would scream bloody murder until my mum would go into the attic to wake him up. This became a routine thing, but never once got less freaky. He suffered from extreme insomnia at that house, being too scared to fall asleep, or just couldn't sleep. I remember my dad looking like a zombie to me during the time, probably from being so restless and working a lot. He didn't take on the whole religion thing as a kid, and never turned to the church for help. Talking to him later on, however, he admits it was very haunted. His night terrors usually involved my brother, mum, or myself getting murdered. He spared me the details most of the time, and didn't ever feel comfortable speaking about it. My mum, who was an atheist, although was also raised Catholic, had her sand blasting machine set up in the creaky, leaky basement that had stairs down from the kitchen, and a cellar door outside leading to it as well. The concrete staircase spiraled down and was pretty steep. The basement itself was riddled with mice, and I think we even found a feral cat with babies down there. It honestly looked like an old, damp torture chamber, with terrible lighting and mold everywhere. My mother spent countless hours in that basement, putting designs into glassware and tiles to sell so that she could help my dad support us. She told me she always had terrible feelings from being down there alone, and hated working in the dim light. Often, she would open the cellar door to let light in, but she hardly let my brother and I keep her company down there while she was working. Around 2004, we moved out, and the family sold the whole riverfront property for roughly $1 million to some rich guy who wanted to rent the rooms out for fishermen. Last I checked though, it has since been sold or rented out to some hippies who raise goats. I drove by it last week, and you can see through the giant glass windows that she has the rooms illuminated with red lights for some reason. My mum began having sleep paralysis at the house, but doesn't get it much anymore. My parents divorced in 2014, and she is now engaged to someone else, about to be happily married this March. My dad's night terrors continued for years after we moved, but eventually they stopped. His insomnia never went away though, and he was restless until the day he passed away. It was last weekend, at the young age of 50. Since I was maybe 5, I've been having routine nightmares, crazy lucid dreams, and constant sleep paralysis, even though I live away from my family now, and in my own apartment. I have had a handful of petrifying paranormal experiences with my boyfriend. My brother is 23 now, and takes care of my grandma in the apartment my dad died in. He hasn't had nightmares like he used to, I think. We don't talk about that much anymore, but we are both busy people. My cousin, Aunt Elle's daughter, recently told me she also suffers from sleep paralysis and oddly frightening dreams, although she never lived in the ranch house. They did come a lot when we lived down there, so she has spent time in the house. We're both 20 years old now, and we don't talk much nowadays, but we always felt a stronger relationship than the other cousins did, because we look identical and sound alike. None of her brothers or sisters ever had any problems like that. It's currently 5:20 AM, and I'm telling this story because Aunt Elle called me about an hour ago. This was out of character for her, because she has a normal 9-to-5 job, and thus a normal sleep schedule. She doesn't work tomorrow, but still is a little strange. She called me to tell me that she found her original crucifix, which she swore she'd lost 30 years ago in that house. She gave it to her daughter and told her to wear it, as Jesus is supposed to protect you from demonic presence. She also decided to give me her second crucifix, hoping it protect me from whatever invisible presence might be around me. I plan on never taking it off, as she really wants me to have this. Please understand that I know millions of people experience sleep paralysis and nightmares every day, and they aren't demonic. Even though they feel that way, scientists can somehow logically explain why these things happen to us in our sleep, with science. However, I don't feel like my family's experience can be completely explained. I was raised without a god to pray to, and have never been religious. In fact, doubting the presence of a higher power. Last Sunday, when my dad passed away, happened to be one of the gloomiest winter days. Once his soul let go and left his body, the sun came out from behind the dark clouds. I can feel for certain he's not far away. He's in the beautiful, clear sunsets that happen every night this week. In my thoughts, and also forever in my heart. It could just be a coincidence, or a silly way to cope. But I suddenly have no doubt he is watching over my family and I. Everything recalled by me and my family members is true. None of it is fabricated, and I didn't exaggerate any details. But keep in mind I was very young when I lived there, and it's totally possible that my mind may have misinterpreted some events. My dad's night terrors were scary as hell, no matter what age I was. I missed that house oddly though. I had my first memories there with plenty of amazing ones to weigh out the scary ones. I'm still not sure if I believe in Catholicism or any religion, but there just might be lost souls walking around us. Dad, I'd like you to know that you'll never be forgotten. Rest in peace. This happened about 30 years ago. I was the ripe age of 23, and ready to move out of my parents' house for the first time. My parents had been saving some money in order to give to me for when I wanted to move out, in order to put forward that money for a house. That, coupled with my grandmother's recent death, meant that I had accumulated quite a sum in order to try purchasing my first home. This was a while back when homes were cheaper, and it wasn't anything fancy. I knew I wouldn't be able to afford anything fancy, but I was happy with the idea that I would have my own space for the first time in my life. Whilst looking for places to live, did a friend tell me that he had an uncle that was selling a small rundown house with accompanying land at an extremely reasonable price. I jumped at the opportunity, had a look around, and even though it had clearly been neglected and was most definitely a fixer-upper, I thought to myself that I could move in pretty quickly and do it up as I lived there. That was a mistake, but I didn't know that until now. The house was quite run down, as I said before. Not all the windows would close all the way. Some of them were sort of stuck. The wood was peeling off, the locks didn't work, and the door was hanging on by its hinges. Those were also falling off. I knew it was a lot of work, and my parents were adamant that I should look elsewhere, but it being not too far from home, and still not far from the city, despite being a fair bit rural, meant that it was idyllic for what I wanted. The first 2 months were challenging. I ended up not moving out like I expected, leaving half my stuff there, and living back in my old room in my parents' house, which they weren't so thrilled about, as they wanted to sell and downsize, and they couldn't do that with me living there. But anyway, in the 2 months that I lived with them, I had saved up enough money to start making some serious fixes in the house and give it some much needed tender love and care. Over the following weeks, did a guy called Barry come over. He was a general handyman that the guy who sold it to me knew, and was helping me with the repairs at an also very reasonable rate. He and I seemed to be getting on quite well. For context, I am a female, and an only child. Not that that's important, actually. And I thought that we had a good connection, despite him being at least 25 years older than me. But I saw him like a nice, protective, fatherly figure in a sort of way. We got chatting one evening when he finished doing some adjustments to the locks, and then he started coming on to me. I suppose I was being a bit generous with the beer, celebrating how much progress we had made. And just by the eyes he was giving me, I knew his intentions were a bit more than what I had in mind. I had to shut him down some way, so I just told him there and then that I had a boyfriend, kind of slipping it into the conversation. He went quiet when I made the pass-by comment, and kind of sat there, a little bit bummed. I guess with him being a bit drunk, he was showing his emotions a fair bit more. Sitting there, gloomy, he stood up, wobbled, and said he needed to pee. Walked out the house, and didn't come back that night. We spoke over the phone the next day, and I think, judging by his chipper expression, he had forgotten what had transpired last night. I was hoping he'd forgotten that he'd made that pass in the confidence of being drunk, and hopefully, with me not offering any more alcohol, that situation should be avoided in future. During the next few weeks, he came round as scheduled, helped me out, and everything was as it was. I was happy. The house was coming along fantastically, and he was just making some adjustments to the attic, which was somewhere I still didn't really want to go. You see, there were still some boxes up there that belonged to the people who lived here before, and although this was now my house, I didn't feel super comfortable going through people's things, especially as from what I know, they were dead and didn't have any relatives to hand this stuff over to. He was just changing the locks as they had fallen through, and the attic door was just swinging wildly in the ceiling. The story really begins now. Now that you have the background, of course, you'll understand why everything that took place did. So all the building works were finished, my house was looking good, and anything else that needed to be done, I was confident I could finish myself, or just didn't have enough money to put into yet. It was a typical summer's day, quite warm, and I had just finished work. I came home, had a shower, and sat myself on the sofa, ready to watch TV and eat dinner on a little tray. As I was munching down my food, did I hear a noise above my head? It sounded like footfalls in the attic. Bear in mind at this point I'd only been in the attic about twice, and had vouched not to go there until it was absolutely necessary to clean it out, or to put things in. These noises were freaking me out, but I told myself that there were animals that had probably gotten in, and tried to think of that. I kept on watching my show, but the noises persisted. Whatever it was that was up there didn't care that I could hear it, which made me more confident that it wasn't a person, and that it must be an animal. The noises stopped not long after, but the next morning I woke up, and one of the windows was slightly ajar. That was weird, I thought. I closed the window, telling myself I must have opened it while I was tired in order to let the air in, and then closed it at night, but obviously not well enough. During the next few weeks, I kept feeling uncomfortable, that someone was watching me in the house. It was a very unpleasant experience. And after a few more days of this, did I have the courage to tell my dad that I was feeling uneasy and ask if he could come over and look around. He did, and didn't find anything suspicious. That's when he asked me about the attic. I told him that I hadn't been up there, and he said that he'd like to take a look just to check. He went up, had a look around, and then let out a yell. He found newspapers, chips, all kinds of junk food up there, and was starting to get panicked. I came up, and that wasn't the worst of it. There were some Polaroid photos of me asleep, of me in the shower, all kinds of creepy pics. Someone had been up here. Someone had been taking pictures, letting themselves in and out of my house. I only just noticed that there were actually small holes that had been drilled from the ceiling down into some of the rooms, so that you could look down these little peepholes and see into my life. I was beyond horrified. It turns out that the toilet had this little plastic ceiling ventilation that you could quite easily pull up if in the attic, given where the hole was. That's how whoever this was had gotten pictures of me in the shower, as I didn't have a curtain, I just had glass. I was so horrified. I took the pictures off my dad because we had to contact the police. After a lot of back and forth, they asked me who had access to the house, and I said no one, that I'd only just purchased it and that I'd recently done a renovation. They asked if it were possible that someone who had helped me renovate may have a copy of the key, and that's when it hit me. I remember now that the handyman who'd been helping me out was the one who'd offered to put in all the new locks, and therefore it could be possible he had a key. I was absolutely horrified at the thought, and when they went over to his house to question him, he confessed there and then. Not only that, it was pretty obvious because he had more Polaroids of me just sitting on his kitchen counter. Well, case closed, I'd say. I didn't want to press charges. I just filed a restraining order, and fortunately, have not seen him again. I never felt safe in the house after that. I sold it after about another few months and moved 3 states away. I couldn't live anywhere near him, knowing that he was in the area. A few years back, one of my best friends and business partner was and still is a single dad. His ex-wife was in and out of mental institutions for years, and he had sole custody of his 2 kids, a boy of 10 and a girl of 14. My friend had to travel to New York in order to oversee the multimedia setup for the auto show for the Ford display. I was back at the office with the programmers during the day and would stay with the kids each evening. Their house was a new 2-story rental in the woodlands of Texas. The development was built in a heavily wooded area just north of Houston. Weird stuff started to happen at night while I was there. I was watching TV with the kids when the lights would go off in the den. The light switch was on the other side of the room. I went over and the switch was turned off. I thought it was a problem with the breaker, or there was another set of light switches. But if there is another light switch, who turned it off? I flipped the switch on and the lights returned, so we went back to sit down. The lights came off again. I walked back and found the switch flipped back down to off. This disturbed me and went on for a while. I asked the kids if this had happened before, and they told me that every now and then the lights would go. So now I'm trying to act unconcerned in front of the kids. Suddenly, there was a loud crash in the attic. We went upstairs and opened the attic door to check. There was nothing there. It was completely empty, and thus no explanation of what had made the loud noise. I was thinking that there was someone else in the house. Their mother had showed up unexpectedly before at their old house, but she was in jail at the time, and supposedly did not know this address. Things quieted down, and it was eventually time to go to bed. I let the family Labrador check all the doors and made sure they were locked, then went up to the guest bedroom, which was between the kids' bedrooms. I left my door cracked, and I had just turned the bedside lamp off, and as I was lying down, I saw the silhouette of a boy crouched between the cable box and VCR lights on the other side of the room. I thought the sun was getting ready to try and scare me, so I turned on the bedside lamp and said, "Gotcha," but there was no one there. Then there was another loud crash in the attic. This woke up the kids, and now they were scared. We then heard a door slam downstairs. I told them it was a new house thing, and that noises happen, and told them I would sleep in the daybed out in the hallway. I made my rounds again, and we all went back to sleep. When I woke up next morning, the kids and the dog were all asleep on the floor next to my bed, and I still had 4 more nights to go. I had to go to work that day, and when I got back to the house it was getting dark. The wind was starting to pick up, and all of the tree limbs were swaying. There was thunder in the distance, however the kids seemed fine. I helped them with their homework, made dinner. Nope, we weren't going to McDonald's again, and we were all finally ready to settle down and watch TV. The storm was worsening, and there was more thunder and lightning. The den in the house was huge, with large floor-to-ceiling windows, and the walls went all the way to the rafters. There was an interior balcony on the 2nd floor that wrapped around 3 of these walls, and there was an exterior balcony facing the backyard. You could see through the upper windows out to the lower part of the outside balcony. So now the rain is coming down in sheets. The wind is blowing, and bursts of lightning. Suddenly, The daughter says she sees something moving out on the balcony. I look up, and it looks like a pair of legs in dark pants scurrying past one of the windows. So I'm thinking, do I get the gun out of the master bedroom? But that opens up a whole new can of worms, so I run back up the stairs from the kitchen to the second floor hallway and out through the balcony door. The wind is blowing cold rain right into me, and I get soaked, but I don't see anyone there on the balcony. I go back downstairs and tell them that there's no one outside. Shortly thereafter, I tell them that it's time for bed, and the son goes right to bed and goes to sleep. The daughter is afraid of storms, and the dog won't go in her bedroom, and her cat is nowhere to be found. I tell her I'll sit with her until she goes to sleep, and I bring a chair into her bedroom and set it on the left side of her bed. We talk about storms, and I tell her about being in a tent in the army during really bad storms, and how nice it is to be in a house for this one. We both fall asleep. There's a loud clap of thunder, a flash of lightning, and I see a dark figure of about 5 feet tall standing in the far corner of her room. I jump to my feet, but now I don't see anything. I don't want to wake her up, and carefully walk around her room to check the hallway, and slowly sit back down. I eventually doze off again, and later I hear a noise and started looking around. The cat is curled up on the foot of her bed, and the dog is starting to lay down at my feet. The storm has passed, and looking outside her bedroom window, stars are shining up above the tree line. I go lay down in the daybed out in the hallway, and just as I fall asleep, I hear the door downstairs slam shut. It sounds like the kitchen door to the garage. I go downstairs. The kitchen door, door to the garage, and front door are all shut and locked, and I start to walk over to the master bedroom suite, but something tells me not to go there. I head back upstairs and lay back down. What seems like seconds later, the alarm goes off, and it's time to start a new day. I have breakfast and go, and it was my turn to drive school carpool. This happened when I was 9 or 10. I was staying the night at my friend Catherine's for the first time. We met the summer before and were inseparable ever since. Kat lived in this old 2-story house surrounded by woods and dirt road. The house itself gave me an uneasy feeling when I first saw it. The shutters were falling off. The paint on the house seemed to be fading. It was an old piece of shit now that I think about it. But at the time I was excited. I remember walking in after I stared at the house for what seemed like ages. Surprisingly, the inside was a lot nicer than the out, so I pushed that uneasy feeling down and just shrugged it off as nerves. I remember the smell of the house. I can't pinpoint it, but it was different, like walking into a musty room. I started to walk around just to explore my surroundings, but noticed Kat's mum watching me. I simply smiled and waved, but she stood there staring at me wide-eyed. I'd never met her before, but why was she staring at me like that? Suddenly, Kat flew around the corner and tackled me, and we both fell and started to giggle. I noticed Kat's mum out of the corner of my eye, start to turn around and walk off, and she was gone, just like that. Fast forward a few hours, Kat and I are lying on a beanbag in her room watching Children of the Corn, which, by the way, was one of my favourite movies at the time. I grew up watching horror movies, mostly Stephen King movies or any other movies my mum was watching at the time. Not her decision, mine, because I love the feeling of a good horror movie. She felt the same way, and that's why we clicked so much. So we were sitting there, watching this movie, and suddenly the door opposite us slams closed. We both jumped, giggled, and brushed it off, because we're kids. Until the second time, when it creaked open and slammed again. Not even seconds after the first time now. So now I'm sitting there, staring at this door, trying to figure out how the hell it's opening and closing alone. In the midst of all of that, the only other person in the house is her mum, which I figured out earlier was just a tad bit creepy. "You think it's just your mum?" I asked her, but she shook her head. "You sure?" I asked. I asked again, but she said something that gave me chills, and still gives me chills just telling this story. "My mum isn't home. It's just you and me, silly." I just stare at her for a while. She's staring at me, trying to wrap my head around what she just said. Who leaves their 9-year-old home alone with a friend in a 2-story house? "Where is your mum?" I asked her. "She's at work." I giggled, thinking she was trying to trick me. "She's at work. She only works for a couple of hours, so she leaves me here and she trusts me," she says. At this point, I was just looking at her, and she notices this look of worry on my face. "What's wrong?" she asked. "If your mum's at work, then who was the lady staring at me earlier?" As I said this, we hear what seemed like footsteps at the door, but thinking about it now, it sounded like shuffling in one spot above us. I'm completely scared at this point. Every hair on my neck is standing out, and I just want to leave. I start to get up, when Kat pulled me back down and asked me if I heard that noise. I nodded. It was silent again, until the footsteps were back, but louder and faster. We both stared up at the ceiling and she grabbed my hand. "This happens every day," she whispered. I looked over at her and could truly see the fear on her face. The footsteps stopped, and she looked at me, her face flushed white. "Is there an attic?" I asked. She pointed up towards the ceiling. "Well, maybe it's just squirrels or birds," I kept thinking over and over. You ever notice when you're really quiet? That's when you can hear most things around you. Imagine if you're sitting in a house with your best friend, alone, at 10 years old, and you hear the giggle of a 3-year-old child. Mind you, she has no younger brothers or sisters. We are completely alone. Kat was just as scared as I was. I remember thinking I just wanted to get out of this house, just grab her and run to the door. At least we would feel safer and less scared outside the house than we would be inside of it. "Want to hear a story?" Kat asked, pulling my mind back into reality. I nodded. "Well, this house used to be a daycare. There was this lady that would watch the kids, and one day she just locked them in the attic and then hung herself from a rope in the kitchen. They all died because the kids were hungry and thirsty, and no one found them for months after. In this house." My heart started to pound, my eyes wide with fear, and I just looked at her. "It's true," she said. "I've seen them, the little kids, every day. But I've never seen the lady. But you have." After she told me this, I don't remember much else but running out of the door of her room and making it outside. She followed, begging me to stay, but I just had to get out. My stomach felt like knots. I felt like I'd walked into a horror movie myself and just wished this had never happened. Fast forward, years later. That day was the last day I had seen or heard from Kat. I remember what she looked like. I never remember meeting her parents or seeing them out in public. I'm 27 now, and I can't seem to find any proof that she exists. All my friends that I was friends with then, I'm still friends with even now. But why not her? I drove by that house maybe 15 times, and still wonder, was she one of the ones that never made it out? As a young kid, I grew up in the South, primarily Fort Worth / Dallas, Texas, and Montgomery, Alabama. It's important to point out that any kids mentioned, including myself, had not been exposed to the bogeyman or any bump-in-the-dark concept that may have spurred this situation until it was already happening. We lived in multiple homes, all of them on the fringe of suburban development, where my parents would commute, but still in the country. My parents were both raised on farms and didn't want me to be a city kid entirely. All of these small homes, while we lived in the South, were adjacent to large ranch pastures and cotton fields that would give way to more countryside. It was commonplace to see all kinds of critters, from rattlesnakes to tarantulas in the front lawn. I'm not sure if the rural Gulf Coast region is significant, but I thought I'd make a mention of it, as it may help someone narrow this down as what was going on. Anyway, I was an only child, with a mother who stayed at home back in 92 to 95. My mother is an elementary school teacher and really pushed reading and writing on me at an early age. I was crudely but frequently reading before I was 3. Mostly picture books and Dr. Seuss, nothing too complicated. Reading is significant for me to bring up with this experience, since it exposed me to this thing through a little habit I had in relation to my reading. I had this awesome animal skeletal book back then. In the book, the diagrams of the different skeletons would glow in the dark, so I got into a habit of charging my book. Then, alone, I would go into a closet or cupboard and view it in the darkness. This became a way for me to have privacy as a kid, and began as something that was very enjoyable for me. I would take a flashlight and read my book in the dark. The sensory deprivation would help me focus or calm down, just sitting in the dark alone with a book and my imagination. Not seeing my hands in front of my face was a very novel phenomenon at that age. I'm explaining this since I want people to understand I was extremely comfortable as a toddler/kid to be in the dark and to be in there alone. Sitting in a pitch-black room was synonymous with fun for me. The first memory I have of that changing was at the first house. It was 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, with a porch next to a lake. It was very cozy, and something right out of ideal Southern Americana. I remember reading Harold's Purple Crayon by flashlight one afternoon, and lost my concentration because I had an overwhelming sense that the atmosphere inside the closet had shifted. I remember the fondness back then for the ambient silence and jet black space. The only sounds perceived were muffled noises from my parents or appliances through the walls. Instead, I vividly remember a claustrophobic smothering feeling weighing on me, and a heavy ringing in my ears. My neck felt flushed and hot, while hair all over my body stood up on goosebumps. Eventually I became enveloped in the overwhelming feeling of paranoia, and fled the closet crying and pitching a fit. I can't remember what happened in the closet. That really bothers me. My memories from this time are clear, leading up to and after I was inside the closet. I remember my parents calming me down by reassuring me that I loved playing in the closet and that I must have let my imagination get the best of me. For the little time left that we lived at that house, I became increasingly more skittish, but only around those closets. But I would still sleep soundly in my own room overnight. I suspect because I had no concept of any creepy, what goes bump in the night type of ideas quite yet. Fortunately, We didn't spend much more time at the house before moving to another one across town, still in Fort Worth. The new place was a one-level duplex, with 2 beds and 1 bath. The neighbours in the other half had 2 daughters around my age, and I would go on to stay in touch with them in later life. I remember specifically asking these girls about any funny business they might be aware of, to reassure myself that I had nothing to worry about. The recent events really had shaken me up, and adults disregarded these concerns. So better to ask kids my own age. The 2 of them were absolutely ignorant of anything I was suggesting. Not that they could really assure me of anything, being that they weren't even in grade school, but I felt assured nonetheless. My heart caved in when I got the bedroom with the closet that had access to the attic that same day. Why my parents did that to me when I was on edge is still beyond me today. I guess they thought it was an opportunity for me to overcome my fears. Parents have done worse things in the name of a child's development, I suppose. My father tried helping with my anxieties by inspecting the attic with me present when I objected to the room. It didn't help, because for the next year we lived there, I would only sleep in that room 2 times. The first night is again a repressed/hazy memory. I just remember being traumatized by waking from a nightmare and seeing the closet door opening, running out of the room hysterical, and then sleeping with my parents. For the preceding year, trying to fall asleep in that room was a test in enduring extreme terror, like holding a hand over a candle flame until the pain became too much to bear. An instinct pulls your palm away. I would try to hold out in the room, because my parents thought I was just going through a phase. Telling them the closet door was opening on its own didn't matter. Hearing the type of thing from a 3-year-old isn't cause for concern. Each night, the house would lull to sleep while I stared terrified of this door, and once one of my parents began to snore, the door would start to open. After this went on for a week, my dad slept in my bed with me, and that was the first time I made it through a night. It was still stressful though, as my dad insisted we should watch the closet door until I passed out. I did, and woke up for the first time in my father's embrace feeling safe. To my parents' credit, they didn't get upset or force me to sleep in the room even after this. They simply made a bed on the floor beside their own that I would occupy each and every night. I'm sure my constant sleeping there was why I didn't get a sibling sooner. The second time I slept in the room was when my dad's side of the family visited. 3 of my cousins and I all crashed in the room. Even with company over though, I never let my guard down. During the daytime, if I spent any time in the room, I would face the closet. The reason for this habit was I was in the room playing with my stuffed animals one day, with my back to the closet, alone. That day, I heard the doorknob open, and when I looked to see where the noise came from, the door was cracked and shut itself as soon as I looked into the darkness inside. This thoroughly scared the shit out of me, and I had my parents inspect the closet to no avail. I had thought I was safe during the day, and had come to terms with whatever it was. It didn't care about waiting until night to take me. I remember around then seeing a National Geographic for the first time, and likening my own situation to being hunted in the savannah with an antelope. My parents thought nothing of me explaining my situation like this. They only thought I was being clever, and were proud that I had such an imagination. I became more paranoid and jumpy as a consequence, and was always high-strung inside the house. I would always be within arm's reach of my parents. I remember sprinting to back and forth between them when they were in different parts of the house. At 3 and 4 years old, I believed that I was playing cat and mouse for my life. Every night having my heart in my throat as I escaped to my parents' room and never having them believe me. The first people to believe me, though, were 2 sons of a family my parents knew through my father's job. I had stopped closet reading altogether at the duplex by this time. The only way I interacted with the closet, or the bedroom, was when company was over after a few months. These 2 boys were over for a playdate during the middle of the week. Their ages were 4 and 5, and they constantly quarreled over toys and getting their own way. They wrestled and hit one another, and it just became par for the coarse behavior with them. They were typical young brothers, and we had many adventures together with the neighbor girls, kicking over fire ant hills and jumping on backyard trampolines. That day, though, we were playing in my room, and they began questioning why I didn't want to get puzzles out of the closet or go near it. I explained myself, and the older brother thought I was making it up to scare them. This resulted in them daring each other to sit by the closet with the lights out, until one chickened out. Nothing happened, and eventually they even had me convinced I was imagining things. I still can't believe how dumb I was letting my guard down, but I wanted to believe so badly that all the times I watched the door open, that it was just my imagination. We all sat inside the closet with the door shut and lights off. The older brother was making fun of me for how silly I was, and I was just trying to laugh it off, all in jet black darkness. I remember finally sitting and relaxing, and was remembering how much I enjoyed not being afraid of the dark. We all sat there and took it in. It wasn't bad, and I was finally hopeful that it really was a phase. They then began to fight. One accused the other of pinching him, and the other denied it. The younger, a moment later, again demanded his brother stop messing with him, and again the older claimed he hadn't touched him. They both began to tell me that they weren't falling for my prank, and I denied touching anyone. The 3 of us all began squabbling, until the younger brother yelped, then in a panic, opened the closet door to get out. The 3 of us, all scared, confused, and not to be left alone in the closet, ran from the bedroom into the kitchen, all of us feeling like we were being chased. The younger brother had a long scratch along his forearm and was bleeding. The cut wasn't deep, but enough to draw a trickle of blood, as if a cat had scratched him with a single large claw. Neither myself or his brother had any trace of blood on us, and my mum was confused and upset, trying to piece it together. She tried to get us to explain what happened, but we were all more afraid of being in the house than articulating the events. She eventually told us to go out into the driveway, and we did our best to explain it to her once we'd all calmed down. She didn't believe it, of course, and their mum ended up grounding them once they got picked up. The scariest thing I remember was my mum checking the room and finding nothing, except that the closet door was closed, and we 3 knew that none of us had shut it during our escape. Eventually I saw the brothers again, and they said they were experiencing something now, because they were terrified of their home basement. They said they used to play downstairs in a guest bedroom before the event at my house, but now they were too shaken up. I believed the 2 of them. The 2 of them both looked tired and fearful, compared to the troublemakers they were before. The girls next door also began to have problems. I remember distinctly a night I escaped my room to my parents and felt it was a closer call than normal. As I was relaxing in my pre-made bed on the floor, I was interrupted when through the wall next door, the two girls began screaming. This woke up my parents, and my father even went next door to see if there was something wrong, because the commotion made him think there was a break-in. Later, the girls revealed that one had gotten up in the night to use the bathroom. The other, in their shared bedroom, had something try and pull her out of her bed by her hair. For the rest of the summer, this kind of thing went on. I constantly had the feeling of being a hunted animal in my house and would sleep with my parents. The neighbor girls and I were sleep deprived, and I remember getting badly sunburnt from falling asleep on a trampoline in the backyard because I was too afraid to rest. At the end of summer, my parents decided that we were moving to Alabama. The last night of the move, my mum finally became a believer to whatever was after me. The floor plan of the duplex was a kitchen/living room in the front of the house, with a single long hallway leading from it to my parents' bedroom at the back. During the last night, my parents were packing up their bedroom into boxes and walking back and forth between the U-Haul parked in the driveway. I had the sense that the thing after me understood that this was the last night to get me. I mentioned I would follow my parents closely. Well, that night, I was clinging to my mum's leg. I would follow her from the bedroom to the U-Haul and back. As we passed by my room, the hallway door to my room was open, and you could view the closet door from the hall. Each time I passed by, I would witness the door opening and then quickly shutting as soon as I looked into the room. I nearly fainted from the stress of seeing this every time we passed by to deliver a box, and my parents were pretty stressed after a year of me being distraught. They were almost done packing up their bedroom, and later that evening, my mum was in their bedroom alone. I had decided to stay in the living room near the front door, and my father was organising boxes in the U-Haul. From the living room, I could see my mother down the hall in her room. She at one point asked me why I wasn't helping her, and suggested I come to her and help her fold clothes since she was almost finished. I refused, and in an attempt to assure me that there was nothing to fear, she walked over to my bedroom hallway door, as if to say, "Look in," and say, "See? Nothing here." Instead, my mom walked to my bedroom door and froze. I heard the closet door in my room slam shut, and my mum screamed and ran over to me and scooped me up. She ran with me to my father and told him that we had to leave. I remember crying and being mentally exhausted, as this just confirmed the madness wasn't over, and even my mother was distressed over it. My parents argued, but my dad gave in. He let my mum take me and herself to a Super 8 for the night, while he finishes packing. My mum spent that night clutching me with all the lights and TV on in the hotel room. I woke up the next morning tucked into a bed and assumed that she never fell asleep that night. I remember telling her I told her so. She gave me a worried look and just stroked my face and hugged me. She never has admitted to anything about that night. She just leaves it as she didn't like the house and can't remember much else. My dad also hasn't spoken about what happened after we left that night. He told me later that he just finished packing and slept in the U-Haul. I would say that after we moved to Alabama for the next 2 years, and eventually up to North after, things improved. The haunted home we left behind imprinted on me some trauma and paranoia that still lingers with me now as an adult. I've stayed in touch with the two girls next door and learnt that they moved out shortly after us. They said the kids that went to school with them in Dallas had similar experiences about the closet/attic monster that would also torment them. I personally from time to time research what it might have been, but always conclude that it was better to leave it be. Until now, I figured someone could help here. I just had a daughter whom I would like to prevent and protect from going through the same crap, as she is only a few months old right now. I don't know what to do. My childhood experience has really made me afraid that there is something out there that tries to hurt and take young children that isn't easily explained. Unexplained things have happened to me all my life, and boy howdy do I have a lot of experiences to share. This all happened in my childhood home, which we sold 4 years ago in the Griffith Park area of LA. My grandparents had moved in with my mum about 6 years ago. My grandpa passed away before I was born, and my grandma didn't want to live alone, so she gave the house to my mum with the condition that she was to live in the duplex, and my mum can raise her family in the main house. It was a 2-story house built in the late 60s, with a duplex that was attached by a door, just to the left of the front door, our side of the house. The main house was big, and the duplex was small, but it was an entire apartment. This is where my grandma lived for the entirety of my childhood years. Our side of the house, or so I was told, was a holistic doctor's office a few years before my grandparents moved in. The doctor worked out of the duplex, which functioned as his waiting room and exam room, and he lived in the main house along with 2 or 3 live-in nurses that worked for him. My family decided it was best not to tell me this info until my late teens, after which I had had multiple strange things happen to me. I'd say my first experience in the house happened when my dad decided to seal off a hallway that connected the master bedroom to a smaller bedroom on the opposite side of the house. My mum wanted to make the 2 rooms separate, so my dad put walls up on either side of the hall, making closets for each room, and essentially creating a big, empty, sealed-off hallway in between. The other room was my room, but I hated it. For years before I realized I was a magnet for paranormal activity. I thought I was just full of anxiety, because sleeping in that room always filled me with fear when I was alone. I remember feeling like someone was going to come up the stairs while I was sleeping and hurt me. I often slept under the bed with a wall of pillows barricading myself in. My parents would just brush me off, chalking it up to too many scary movies with my older sisters. Being in that room always felt weird, but being near the closet, or worse yet, having my back to it, filled me with a strange urgency to get away, or face what was behind me. On the wall that was created by my dad's renovation, we hung this painting of a cat that my grandfather sent me for my birthday. One night, while I was asleep on the bed, which was my first mistake, the painting fell off the wall. I jumped up and looked into the closet just as my dad burst through the door, about to yell at me for breaking something, when he saw me standing there wide-eyed and practically hyperventilating. He looked into the closet. The painting hadn't fallen off the wall. Instead, the glass had shattered out of the frame on its own. And it didn't just shatter, it exploded. There was glass all the way to the door of the closet, which was about 5 feet deep. He told me it was just the temperature of the house changing so drastically that it shattered the glass. We cleaned it up as best we could at 2 a.m. and went back to sleep. Needless to say, I stayed up until sunrise and slept in the living room once the house was awake and I had people around me. After that, late at night, I would often hear someone walking around downstairs, but never said anything, because I always thought it was my dad who had bad insomnia. A few years later, when both my sisters had moved out and my brother took the good room with the balcony, I moved into his old room directly across from our parents' room. This room had a huge floor-to-ceiling built-in bookshelf and a little closet with a 4x4 square hatch to go up into the attic inside. Yeah, that little square hatch and I were not cool. I was around 13 when I moved into this room, and the closet most definitely turned into nightmare fuel. My dad had removed the door because he figured out my magic trick to lean my room and replace the door with an old sheet on a curtain rod. I would often come home from school or wherever, and the attic hatch would be open. Not wide open, but the piece of wood that laid over the hatch would have been slid over about half an inch. My family is very matter-of-fact and stoic, so there's no way they were trying to prank me. Because 1, I never told anyone about my fear of the attic, and 2, we never did any of that stuff. As much as I wanted to be that close, this didn't stop me from asking though. I made sure that it was no one in my family, and this persisted for 2 years. Here's where I lost it. This is the point where I had had enough. I was standing in front of said closet with my dog, Duke. He was a very protective Springer Spaniel that I got for my 9th birthday. My back was to the closet door, or curtain, and I was petting Duke, and I felt something brush the back of my leg, and looked down to my ankle. It was the curtain moving back, as if there was a strong breeze. Duke whined, and I felt a hand on the back of my leg through the curtain. It felt like my leg was pushed forward. So with that momentum I took a step and ran. I ran through the house with my dog at my heels, crying and shouting for my dad. Dad didn't help much. He set me down and told me his paranormal experiences in the house. He had seen one of the nurses walking through the house at 2 a.m. when he was sitting in the kitchen reading. He looked up from his book to contemplate something, and saw who he thought was my grandmother who needed a walker, because she had a broken hip about 6 months prior to this, standing in the doorway. She was in a long nightie and looked bewildered that I was sitting there, and kept walking past the door. He figured that maybe she needed some air or wanted to let the dogs out into the yard, as the dining room had big French doors at the opposite end, which led to the mudroom and backyard. She didn't say anything, and because he didn't see her go back inside, and because he started making some toast or something. Anyway, it was around 7 a.m. when he heard her through the wall. He went to check on her and see what she needed earlier. Maybe it had startled her and she didn't have a bra on or something, so she didn't want to speak that early. She told him that she had been sleeping since 1 a.m. and had just sat up in bed as he walked in. There's no way it was her standing there. It must have been one of the nurses that died there, and was so shocked that he was looking straight at her. So, there you have it. Every summer, I go upstate to a little retreat called my grandparents' house. It's a nice pad, a big place with lots of rooms, in the middle of nowhere, and it's pretty quiet for the most part. It's pretty much in the middle of the woods, and our nearest neighbour is quite a way down the road. There's plenty of space in that house, with 4 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, 3 floors, and an attic. My grandparents never ever use it, and I basically got the basement all to myself. It was a sweet setup. There was a bathroom, a fridge, a television where I play my games console, and a comfortable couch to lounge around all day on. It's the perfect retreat to relax and unwind in peace, when I wasn't running around exploring the woods, of course. It was a typical Friday afternoon for me. I'd just gotten done work around 5 p.m, the most tiring part of the day where the sun is shining, and I'm tired most. I'm ready to unwind and settle down for the rest of the night. when my grandparents inform me that they're going out to catch a show with friends and have dinner, so they'll be back later. I was stoked to hear this, as I love having the house to myself, especially after a long day working. After ensuring everything is off and all the doors are locked, I see them off and order a pizza. After it arrives, I retreat to my little man cave in the basement and lock the door so if I fall asleep, my grandparents won't wake me up if they decide to check on me when they arrive home. Everything was going pretty great. A few hours pass at this point, and the sun is completely down, concluding a very lazy Friday afternoon. It's roughly 10 p.m, and I'm in the middle of watching my show when I hear the floorboards creaking upstairs, the signal that my grandparents have returned home. It sounded like there were 4 sets of feet instead of 2, so it was a safe bet that they brought their friends over for company, which was pretty common. I hear chairs creaking and sounds of conversation, so I turn up my TV and lounge back. Before I knew it, I'm drifting off to sleep, and just as I thought it would happen, I hear the doorknob above jiggle. I just ignore it and relax. After about 2 hours of peacefully laying there, I decided to call it a night and head upstairs to my real bed. It's midnight now, and all quiet up above, so I assume everyone has gone to bed already. I get up from the couch and head upstairs to the first floor. I unlock the door, and a few of my kitchen lights are on, as well as the TV, but for some odd reason it was muted. I figure my grandma was possibly in the bathroom and was wrapping up her show or something. So I left everything on and walked over to the stairs to the second floor. This is when I realized something wasn't right. From the downstairs you can see the doors to every room. At night, when my grandparents are asleep, they usually keep their doors closed, or obviously the bathroom door closed if someone is using it. When I looked up, however, the upstairs was pitch black, and all I could see is every single door open. I called out upstairs, but I didn't get any response at all. In fact, it seemed as if this house somehow grew more silent. I walked over to the front window and looked out. Not a single car was in the driveway. I was the only one home. I called my grandparents to check in. They were still out, and they let me know it would be a late night. I asked them if they had stopped at any point back home, and they hadn't. Nobody had come home since 5. We weren't expecting any visitors either. The entire time, it was just me, in the house, alone. But I knew that I'd heard something upstairs, so I called upstairs to them. I checked around the living room as quietly as I could, knife in hand, and I refrained from calling out the police like a total idiot. My grandparents even offered to when I told them about the situation, but I opted not to. I silently checked the doors. They were all still locked, and I checked the windows. They were locked too. I sat in the living room and listened hard. It was just silence. After about an hour, the front door opened and my grandparents were finally home. Their presence calmed me down a lot. We searched the rest of the house and there didn't seem to be any sign of a break-in. There weren't any other incidents after that, and my grandparents had actually moved since then. I wasn't really able to sleep well in the house after that night. It always felt like I was being watched. Always. To this day, I'm not really sure what it was. The reason I'm sharing this with you now is because one thought dawned on me. We never did search the attic that night, nor did my grandparents ever go up there. There was so much space in the house, there was never any reason for us to. But maybe, just maybe, somebody else did. A comforting thought to have was when the entrance to the attic was in fact in my bedroom. The first time we had an inkling that there was something in our room/hall, I had gotten up to go to the bathroom to have a coughing fit so I wouldn't wake up my roommate. I came back, pulled out a cough drop, and sat in bed, staying awake and chewing on the cough drop, as I didn't want to choke in my sleep. As I'm sitting there, I hear 2 very light knocks on the door, like someone knocking with one finger or knuckle. Immediately after the knocks, I hear someone whisper, "Let me in." I look over to my bed to see if I can see any shadows out the hall from under the crack in the door, but I didn't see anything. I heard 2 more light knocks and then nothing. I thought maybe a hallmate had gotten locked out of their room and didn't wake their roommate. But when I asked my friends in the hall the next day, they had no idea and said they'd rather wake up their own roommates than someone else. The next time, about a month later, I got a little cocky, and some friends and I went up to the attics to see if we could look inside. The woman who keeps our building clean tells us that there's a ghost up there, and there are crosses drawn on the inside of the windows, and some are taped up, so that no one can see inside. So of course, being the dumb white people we are, we go upstairs and have a look. We didn't see anything, but being up there made the hair on the back of our necks stand on end. That night, and for 2 nights after, my roommate and I couldn't sleep for shit. Even though we were dead tired from our workouts, we couldn't fall asleep. We both blame it on the ghosts, but neither of us are really sure. The 3rd time, about a month and a half ago, I woke up, facing the wall with my back to the rest of the room, to the sound of someone very quietly opening the dresser drawers. This went on for a few minutes, and I figured that my roommate was getting up early to leave and didn't want to wake me, so I went back to sleep. But I woke up at 7, and she was still in her bed. When she woke up later, I had asked her if she'd gotten up and opened some drawers. She looked at me and said no. Ordinarily, I'd blame it on sleepwalking, but she never sleepwalks. Never. I'm usually the one who talks or moves in their sleep, but she never has any history of doing that at all. The most recent time was just last night. My roommate's mum was in town, and she went to sleep with her in a hotel, so I was alone. I woke up at about 2 or 3 in the morning to the sound of glass being slammed on. I heard someone pacing around the room, and I heard someone sit down and start chewing. I stayed perfectly still, scared shitless, and trying not to make any sound that would indicate me being awake. Eventually I heard more pacing, and then I'm pretty sure I stopped hearing anything. I let my body relax after being held stiff as a board for about 10 minutes, and I eventually fell back to sleep. I ended up having nightmares that someone had crawled all over our walls, destroyed our room, and hung up creepy signs saying things like IGKYN, OID, and other stuff which subconsciously decided to translate I'm gonna kill you next, and OP is dead. I'm 100% confident I was fully awake for these encounters. It started out as kind of cute and fun, and I loved telling people about the ghost in my room, but after last night, I'm kind of terrified. I've never felt that scared in my own room. This story is very twisted. It also took place at a neighbour's house. The neighbour's nanny is a very kind-hearted old woman who has been babysitting and looking after the neighbour's kids and their large family for about 10 years now. She's a wonderful old lady who doesn't mean harm to anybody. She's also good friends with my mother, as in some days when my mother is sick or something, the neighbour's nanny will come over to babysit my younger brother. She told me this story one day when she had come over to look after him, when my mother had gone out to the city to visit my grandparents, as my grandmother was very ill and it was an emergency. She told me that strange things had been happening in the next door house. One night, the mother of the house woke up to someone banging from the backyard porch, almost as if someone was stomping. She was pretty scared, and since her husband was out of the country that week, she, along with the nanny, went out to check what was going on. Now bear in mind, Nanny used to sleep in on those days when the husband was out of town, and the mum and her little kids were alone at home. So basically, the nanny went out down the first steps and behind her followed the mum. And this is exactly what she told me. She walked down the steps towards the glass back door, and she pulled back the curtains to see a super old man with a white beard, all the way down to his elbows, standing there looking at her. He wore white clothes and had a plain, dead expression plastered on his face. Trust me, every bit of it is true. She screamed, let go of the curtains, and the mother, who was still tailing behind, came rushing. But when they both pulled back, in order to check, to the nanny's utter shock, there was no one there. After this event, the mother made sure that she, the kids, and the nanny all slept in one room until the father came back from his business trip. Fast forward a few days later. The father had returned, the kids were at school, and my mother and the nanny were cleaning out a musty old closet in the attic. There were quite a few old boxes and dusty old bags being kept up there, with stuff like old pictures, clothes, or children's toys and souvenirs. Now, this closet that they were cleaning was high, so the mum used a stepladder in order to elevate herself so that she could easily look inside and take things out. Basically, the mother was up on the ladder cleaning out the closet, and frequently tossing down dusty boxes and bags in order for the nanny to start looking at. Anyway, one by one, Mum was throwing out dusty cardboard boxes full of old toys or clothes packed away long ago, when she came across a small box. Surprisingly, it was packed up in fresh tape but smelled really bad. It seemed practically empty, as it was very light. Mum peeled away the tape and opened the box and peered inside. That is when she screamed in horror and threw it to the floor and began to cry. The nanny, who was standing below, watched as the box fell to the floor, entirely unaware of what was inside. She slowly stepped forward and took a look inside, and there was a doll, who she later found out used to belong to the mum, and it was very precious to her since a young age. The doll just lay there in the box, but on its plastic neck, someone had used a knife to make slashes and cuts. Now, since it was made of plastic, it was very obvious that someone had not tried to cut the doll's head, but simply made deep slashes on its neck. The most shocking part was that the doll was packed away about 15 years ago in the box by the mum. She loved the doll, and it held many childhood memories, but she didn't want to throw it away, so she packed it up. And literally no one had entered the attic for ages, as it was upstairs and only had old, unimportant boxes. I don't know if the doll was linked to the old man, but it happened within that very week. So that remains a question unanswered. How did the doll get those slashes when it was safely tucked away and no one can touch it? And who on earth was that old man? I am a 21-year-old female from Europe. I live in a semi-big town behind the local cemetery. Now, I've always had experiences before with the paranormal since I was a child, like seeing apparitions at night, feeling presences and seeing spirits in my dreams. They didn't happen all the time, but enough for me to know that they were real. I also have a few friends that have a sixth sense, if you want to call it that have helped me through the years with these experiences. These experiences have become less as I got older, especially when I started university. But I can still feel presences when they appear near me, although I have never been able to see them or talk to them when awake. I did meet them through time to time in my dreams though. I didn't talk to them a lot, depending on what the dreams were about, or if I knew that I was dreaming. But I remember them being in those dreams because the feeling of their presence always lingered for a bit after I woke up. Over the past 6 months or so, I've been trying to pay more attention to my sixth sense and try to train it, as I always thought of it as an essential part of myself, but could never really bring myself to train it properly, because I was scared of seeing things like in horror games, or making a mistake and accidentally getting the attention of a bad spirit. As far as I've known, my house has never been haunted. It isn't that old either, maybe 25 years, and we have been the only residents, but I start to get paranoid when it gets dark. My room is in the attic, while all the other bedrooms and whatnot are on the ground floor, and we don't have a basement. And when I walk through the corridor up the stairs at night, I always feel like I'm being watched. I also get the same feeling when I'm showering at night. I just don't trust the mirror or window, though it's high enough that people cannot look inside. I've occasionally seen figures in my peripheral view, but they never move and just disappear when I look at them directly. I also feel like something will run from behind me, if not looking, even if all the doors are closed, except my parents' room, which is always open, even when they're asleep. Though I've never felt something coming from their room, so I made it a habit to walk around with my phone's flashlight at night and occasionally look behind me. It became worse a few months ago when I had a nightmare of these shadow people. In the dreams, I was standing in the corridor and I knew something was wrong, when all of a sudden I hear people running down the stairs, and lo and behold, the shadow people were running in broad daylight, down the stairs through the corridor and exiting through the window of my old bedroom on the ground floor. There is one of them that stopped and looked at me in the eyes, with just its white scribbly circles grinning at me, with a smile that almost looked like that of a Cheshire cat, before he also went into the room and disappeared when he goes through the window. And at that moment I realized that they had come from my bedroom where I was sleeping. I woke up in terror, turning all of my lights on, and did the best to calm down before trying to go to sleep again. Another time, one of the Velux windows in the attic had mysteriously opened when nobody was home, and all of the doors were locked. And even though I don't think it had anything to do with the paranormal, I did remember I have this big cupboard in my room that leads to a small area behind the wall that's big enough for 2 people to sit down. A few years back, that same window was open along with that cupboard door that is always closed. So I went to open it up to be sure nothing was hiding there. But as I was opening it up, I suddenly got the feeling a presence was there that I didn't recognize, and that maybe wasn't so good-natured. I couldn't open the door enough to peek in because my shoe rack was in the way, so I grabbed my phone to try and film if anything were there. The first few takes it didn't want to record properly, but in the end there was nothing of interest, and the video didn't capture anything either. My mum and stepdad know that I feel things, but we don't really talk about it a lot, and I don't really have the need for it either. But my stepfather has said that he feels something weird in this house from time to time, and it's only in certain places, but he can't explain it either. Nothing majorly dangerous has ever happened. I don't think I'm in danger, but I wanted to know if any of you guys have experienced something similar, and how you can get rid of shadow people. There was one time around 2011 when I was 17 and we rented a house with my parents and grandparents in Corsica, which is an island south of France, for a week to enjoy a summer vacation. It was a one-story house with a sort of attic. A bit old school judging by the decorating, but overall really nice, with a lovely view on the nearby beach. My room was in the attic, which was all good, carpeted with a bit of furniture and a small window, and you had to climb a ladder and go through a trapdoor in the pantry to get to it. Sounds a bit weird when you say it, but it was a sweet place, and as a teen I enjoyed the privacy. The first night I didn't sleep well. I had nightmares which I couldn't remember and was overall agitated, and woke up more tired than before. I brushed it off as coming from the heat or the general setting of the place. Nothing really out of the ordinary, even if I'm usually a fairly sound sleeper. The second night, I had been sleepwalking. I woke up down in the pantry, my heart beating like crazy with no idea why I was out of bed. It happened once or twice before, and a few more times since, but that wasn't really common for me. A bit unsettled, I went back to bed and had trouble to sleep again. But the next morning, I hardly had any memory of it and brushed it off once more. The third night was too much. I felt like I hadn't slept at all, even if I must have, as I was laying in bed trying to fall asleep for a while. I had that weird feeling that someone was watching me. I checked the window for no real reason, as it was too high for anybody to be there, then closed the trapdoor going down to the pantry. I actually locked myself in. As I went back to bed, the feeling persisted, and when I looked around, I had the certitude that someone was in the room, watching from somewhere in the dark. I remember turning the lights on and finding nothing. Since I was pretty scared at that point, I left the lights on and probably eventually fell asleep. I woke up sometime later in complete darkness, and someone was at the end of my bed. A silhouette watching. I completely lost it. I started to breathe heavily, and with my eyes wide open I saw more silhouettes emerging from the dark corners of the room, getting closer. I couldn't take my eyes off them, feeling like if I did, they would grab me. I couldn't move either. I couldn't decide what I should do. Scream at them? Call for help? Run for it? I eventually went for the trap door, struggled to open it, and fell my way down the pantry, closing the door after me, and made it to the living room. I was standing there half naked and completely freaking out, trying to figure out what to do. I could wake up my parents, but to tell them what? That some creatures were in my room? That wouldn't do. I checked the doors and windows were locked as usual, so no one else would be there. I ended up on the couch and fell asleep there as dawn broke slowly. My family found me in the morning, and after that, I told my parents I wouldn't sleep alone anymore. Aged 16 or so, I'd rather sleep on the floor at the end of their bed than up there in the attic again. They never questioned it, figuring that something happened, and I could swear on my life that I was wide awake. I kept telling myself that because it felt like it. I've never been more scared in my life. I'm not sure I can stress that enough. I told a few people about it who said that it must have been sleep paralysis. But was it? It was so real and vivid, and has never happened anywhere else. And I wasn't feeling stuck in the bed or as if someone was on my chest, which is what I've heard from other people. This place was weird. This room was weird. I didn't get back up there for the whole stay. My parents had to go up and collect my things. I never figured this one out, and never had such an intense and vivid thing happen again. I have a pretty weirdly set up house. To the right of our house, we have no neighbors and a very big open empty field that stops at a busy road, and across the road is a park. My mum and I live there, and our house is pretty small, but just the right size for us. The kitchen door is less of a door and more of an open living room and dining room connected. Super creepy unfinished basement with an unlocked attic door above the stairs. My room has always felt safe. My mum's room, however, always feels cold and uninviting. When I say home alone, only when I'm there alone, weird things do happen. Although my best friend has said that she has felt some things in my house, like heard noises, felt eerie presences, and cold spots, as well as being watched and touched. I have never been physically interacted with, but every time I go down the stairs, I get an intense and overwhelming feeling of dread and like I'm being watched. I usually end up feeling that way right as I pass the attic door, which is important for this story. So about 6 months back, I started hearing what sounded like rodents in the attic, which very well could be the case. Except I also heard the distinct sound of small shoes. So unless the rodents were taking tap lessons, something was up. One day, I'm home alone. It's around 10 p.m. and I started hearing a rolling sound from the corner of my room. The ceiling, the attic floor, it was the sound of a ball being rolled hard enough to bounce off the wall and go back to wherever was rolling it. Well, I wanted to be sure I wasn't going crazy and went to the ceiling and knocked on it. I was shaking because my house had never really felt safe, but I was never convinced that there were ghosts. Whatever was up there responded with the same number of knocks I used at the same speed. To say I almost pissed myself is an understatement. One time prior to that, when my best friend was over, she said she saw a shadow in my closet. I have a small shelf above my closet rod, and she says that she saw the shadow of a small boy there. Just last night is the most recent eerie situation. I was waiting for my best friend to come get me after work. I was in my room, which had 2 windows, one to the big field and one to the unfenced backyard. The basement stairs are right behind my head, and the back door is right in front of the top stair. So I'm in silence, finding a YouTube video to watch on my TV, when I hear clear humming from a female voice. Of course, I held my breath and listened. I then heard what sounded like someone pushing against the back door. I ran to my window and looked out. Nothing. It wasn't coming from inside, and a bit later the same thing happened at the front door. Still nothing. Am I being haunted? Is my house just old? Or am I going insane? A month or so ago, I was watching exploring videos on YouTube of abandoned houses and the like. I had the urge to do so afterwards. So the next day I went to school, came home, packed my exploring bag, and went to an abandoned house in the countryside, which took about an hour to get to by bus. My friends were strictly suggesting that I don't, but I decided to do so anyway. My grandparents only lived a half hour from there. I was recording this. The house had multiple floors, a basement, first and second floor, and an attic. The casual house. It was pretty run down, and there was a lot of trash. I began by going into the basement. It was quite a creepy experience, and there were multiple dead animals, and a cross that was thrown on the ground. I was creeped out. my heart beating like hell, and I still managed to cope with it and get to the first floor, which apparently had a living room and a kitchen. The kitchen's cabinets were full of mold, and the living room had a bashed TV, and there was some red liquid on the old couch. It had soaked it in. I didn't know what it was, so I can't assume. I was disgusted, and the smell was almost unbearable. After exploring the first floor, I went up to the second. It had a bedroom, a bathroom, and the bedroom had a bed which was collapsed, and the sheets were rotten, with a lot of holes, and again, another red liquid that had apparently soaked through. The smell in the bedroom was crazy, and I knew I needed to leave there as soon as possible. The bathroom had a broken mirror and a bathtub, which had human excrement at the bottom of it. Moving up to the attic, this is where I really had to get out of the house and make a run to the bus stop. The attic had bones, though I'm not sure what bones, possibly in animals. It was too crazy for me, and I got out of there as quickly as I could. I got the bus and went home to take a shower, and went under my blankets and got cozy. Though the crazy part begins here, my phone had the recorded footage, right? No. When I checked it, the footage was corrupt, and the video was 0 seconds, all black, and displayed an error that it couldn't be played. I, of course, was very disappointed, but continued on with schoolwork. I got home after school. The second day after going to the abandoned house, I checked my gallery. We had to draw something similar to what the teacher had drawn on the chalkboard, so I had snapped a picture. When doing my homework, I looked in the gallery, and there were the chalkboard pictures, but there was also a picture which featured some sort of distorted face. That was not a picture that I had taken. Since my phone is always with me, I know that none of my friends could have taken it and tried to be funny about it. The weirdest thing is that the picture was allegedly taken on the day I had explored the house, though when going home, there was only the corrupt video. I deleted the picture, thinking I probably accidentally downloaded it. However, I realized I was wrong. The pictures came every day, every single day, and they had the same date, the day I went to the house. I had also performed a factory wipe on my phone, had the system apps, but still, the image kept coming back. The examples of the picture are distorted faces, blurry pictures, and what I assume being a foot, and windows, and other stuff. When I tried uploading them to Discord, they can't be uploaded. It just says, error. The pictures have slowed down now, and they only appear on my gallery every 4 or 5 days or so. The weirdest part is that I've got a picture of a rock with something engraved on it. I am very, very scared. This story is from when I was a teenager and just started high school. My friends and I lived in a town that, at the time, had a lot of farmland. Near my house, a mall had recently been made, so my friends and I tried to ride our bikes to go shopping one day. We missed our turn, and instead wound up on a long road with a small downhill slope that ran through some farmland. Having never been to the mall before, and never having been down this road, we assumed it would lead us to the mall. Instead, this road twisted and turned through thicker and thicker woodland after the farmland ended. At the end of the road, there was an abandoned old house that was visibly falling apart. My friends and I simply turned around and found our way to the mall that day. but we ended up coming back time and time again because the road was long and had just enough of a slope to make your bike go faster than you could pedal. One day, we ended up daring each other to go into the house. Up until this point, we had never gone into it. My friends dared me to go in because I was pretty confident it would be safe if I was careful. So I did. It was a pretty empty house with some old moldy furniture. There were holes in a lot of the floor space. One Halloween's Eve, we went back to the house to play hide and seek for giggles. We brought a few other of our friends, as it was going to be a pretty fun time, or so we thought. At first, everything went all right. We played a few rounds, and some of the girls were sneaking away with their boyfriends off to the woods to make out. But we kept playing. Eventually, I went into the building to hide again, and noticed that while there was a ladder up to the attic, there was a hole I could climb through that led to a more secluded spot of the attic, where I couldn't be seen as easily. I thought to myself, this is the perfect hiding spot, and climbed onto it. I had brought a flashlight, so I turned it on, but kept the light on low to the floor in order not to give away my position outside. I started looking around when I noticed a flash. It was the reflection from a pair of Nike shoes. Someone was already up here. I raised the light to see who else was already up here, but it wasn't one of my friends. He was dressed in torn up clothing. I only held the light over him for a second before noping out of the attic. It took me about 3 seconds to squeeze back through the hole, but the guy stood still, not even acknowledging that I had ever been near him. I told my friends, and we all decided to stop playing and go outside to look at the attic, as part of me was exposed by a hole on the side of the roof, and there was a window that the guy was standing near. Nobody could see him through the hole, so we went to look at the window. We saw a guy with a crazed look in his eyes, and we just bolted. One of us told their parents, and they called the police. The police did not find the person. However, what they did find makes me glad I got out of there as soon as I did. The police found 7 fingers, with 3 being the right index finger, and a human head mounted on the windowsill of the attic. We weren't looking at the guy I had seen. We were looking at a corpse. Apparently that house was being used by a gang, and it was so out of the way and unimportant that nobody ever went to it aside from us. What's more, they found a machete on a tarp where I had seen the guy, and several traps inside the house meant to catch intruders if they tried to sneak into the attic through the ladder. So, guy in the empty house, let's not meet. From the time I was born, through around the time I was 14 years old, I lived in the country. The summer of 2011, my family moved into a house that was downtown in the city. Needless to say, I was stoked. We had experienced some paranormal type stuff in the house, so the family was already a little nervous about the new place. A neighbor had also told us that he thinks the lady that lived in our house before us had ended her husband's life, but we shrugged it off and thought that he was joking. Fast forward about a week, and my grandfather was outside messing around in the garage. I could hear him talking to somebody outside, as I looked out the window to see it was a woman in her early 40s talking to my grandfather. I see him shaking his head, and she seemed super sad. She then fell to her knees and was practically sobbing to him. I felt super uneasy, but didn't want to place myself within the awkward situation. After she left, I asked what she wanted, and to my surprise, he told me that she was the previous homeowner and wanted to come into the house to specifically check the fireplace and attic. I thought quickly about what the neighbor had told us. Maybe this lady had killed her husband and hidden him in one of those places. I know it seems like a movie thing to do, but why else would they only care about those things? Maybe she'd hidden money and stashed it there. Another few weeks passed, and my sister was home alone. She was constantly out and about, so she hadn't heard about the previous owner. When she was about to get into the shower, she heard someone trying to open the front door. Fortunately, it was locked. My sister said she'd seen the lady run around the house and begin banging on all the doors and windows, begging to be let in. My sister called my mother, terrified, so we both drove home quickly, but the woman was gone. My mother called the police, but they said that they really couldn't do anything about it since she had left. At this point, I was scared. I'd watched so many horror films that I knew it couldn't end well. Things began to stop happening around a year and a half. A friend of mine moved in with us, and one day we were outside playing basketball. An SUV pulled up next to our driveway, and when the window was rolled down, it was in fact the crazy lady. She looked like she had fixed herself up and was now somewhat attractive. She began flirting with me and my friend, calling us cute and winking, but I knew what she was doing. She asked if I'd take her into the house, and I said no, but she persisted. Luckily, my mother came out and began speaking to the woman. The lady started crying and begging to be let into the house because she desperately needed to see the fireplace and attic. My mother continued to say no, but the lady wouldn't leave. This part now may seem a little harsh, but I didn't really know what else to do. At the time, I was just getting into making films, and I had very real-looking prop guns in the house. At this point, my mom and the lady began, not really fighting, but it seemed like a conversation that would result in a fight. I took one of the prop guns outside, which was very stupid, and put it in my pants in front of the lady. As I figured, the lady said a few last words to my mother and drove off quickly, and after that, we had never seen her again. Whenever we were finally able to speak to the neighbor that told us the previous owner ended her husband's life, he practically said, "I told you so," and told us that he thought we should rip the fireplace apart and check the attic. We decided not to. We lived in that house for close to 8 years and just recently moved back to the country. There's been odd stuff happening at our new house, but I'm glad we're far away from that crazy lady, and I really hope to not meet her again. Over the course of 2 years, I've had weird dreams about a very specific creature lurking in the attic. It always felt malevolent. Now I don't know if it's an actual thing or my subconscious messing with me, but it deeply unsettled me in ways my dreams almost never do. As someone who is always aware they're dreaming, even dreams where I'm being hunted down didn't scare me, but this does. There have been so many dreams about it, but a few stick out in my head. The least threatening one was a dream where I'm playing video games in my room. I glance out of my bedroom door to see an arm dangling from the opening in the attic. The hand moves like it's beckoning me to come closer. I don't, because obviously, but I watch it. It never leaves the attic, but it keeps trying to get me to go to it. In another dream, I'm in a house that I've never been to. My sister and nieces are in this house with me, and I get the impression it's threatening my family. I'm angry, so I get vocally aggressive, and I get my family out of there and go back to confront this thing. I see it. For the first time in all the dreams I had, it looked like a woman with light purple skin and dreadlocks. I don't remember how this dream ended, but there were more dreams after, never including my family again, just me. The most intense encounter I had was a dream where the attic was right above the bed I was sleeping in. I was lying there, very aware that it was watching me. I figured if I ignored it, it would go away, but I was wrong. It slowly pulled the covers off me, and after a few minutes of lying there, cold, trying to decide if it's safe to pull the blanket up, it grabs me by the throat and lifts me about a foot off the bed, then starts choking me. I felt like my lungs were going to burst when it let go and let me fall back onto the bed, gasping for breath. I don't know how many dreams I had since this one, or if it was the last, but I know it's been at least half a year since I've dreamt about it. I'm very uneasy around attics now, and I always expect to look up and see it again when I pass underneath one, awake or not. Even right now, I keep throwing glances at the attic door right outside my bedroom. Nothing's there, of course, but it's still on my mind. If this thing is not my subconscious, and it's an actual entity, I have no idea what it could be. In my limited experience with the paranormal, I've never encountered anything that felt malevolent before. My hope is that my brain just decided it wanted to be terrified of attics, or that this thing got bored with me and left forever. First of all, a little backstory. Growing up, my grandmother and I would mess around with the paranormal, doing EVPs and such. When I was 13 though, we stopped. My grandma recently started doing it again, and in return, strange stuff has been happening to me. I work in a nursing home, and I've never really experienced anything particularly paranormal. I work nights, so there is the occasional creak in the night, but nothing crazy. That was till one evening when I was emptying a cath bag, and the resident's roommate, who was in the hospital at the time, glass trinket, started to make a sound of glass clanking. I turn around and see the glass trinket fly across the room at me. I calmly walk out and recollect myself, and then go back into the room, pick the object up, and return it to where it belonged. Weeks go by, and one night at around 1 a.m. I'm sitting at the nurse's station and hear what sounds like running down the hall. I get out of my chair to look, but there's nothing. I brush it off as my head playing tricks on me, as I was suffering from some mild paranoia that night. Half-hour later, I've calmed down quite a bit, when the attic starts to creak, and it sounds like human footsteps are coming from above me. I run down to the other unit to ask if any of the maintenance men have come and are in the attic. They laugh and say no. The unit nurse tells me that stuff fell out of one of the attic doors, and one of the items was a mask that you get when you get sick. I then went to look at every attic door, as we had multiple, and they were all closed, and no ladders leading up to them. I tried to tell myself it's all in my head, but to this day I believe that there was someone up there. Then one night I was off at home sleeping, when I recall seeing shadow people walking around my room. They were looking for something. I couldn't move, but I was watching them, wondering what the hell was going on. Then, all of a sudden, I see my grandma's old house, and these shadow people were ripping up the stairs looking for seeds. Then, I was in an apartment complex stairwell, and this boy told me to give him my hand, so I did. And he cut into the top section of my finger, and inside me there were 3 little white seeds, which he took. I went back to sleep and saw the shadow people again. One of them this time touched my back, and I awoke to my back being cold, and to my surprise my shirt was raised up in the back and my back was exposed. Did what I do when I was younger automatically connect me to what she does now? What does this all mean? All of this happened before my parents' divorce. We were all living in a 2-story house with an attic and a basement. It was a normal house for a family of 5, my parents, myself, and my 2 siblings. At night, my parents were sleeping on the 1st floor, and me and my siblings on the 2nd. I always felt really uncomfortable in this house, especially when I was upstairs. I don't really know why, but I felt really anxious and nervous, and my brother was also feeling the same. Some stuff happened to the 2 of us. He heard some voices calling him, and even a knock in the attic. When I was alone in the house, and I was in my bedroom, I would hear as if someone were moving the chairs in the living room, and recently, my sister confessed she had heard the same thing. Even if it was scary, we were used to it, and would try and find rational explanations to these sounds. However, there is one event that my brothers and I still cannot explain. It happened about 6 years ago. It was around 3 a.m., and I remember that I was feeling quite anxious for no reason. That's why I decided to text one of my friends instead of trying to sleep. My sister used to sleepwalk. It stopped after we moved, and this night, as she usually did, she went out of her bed, walked a bit into the hall, and went back to her room. The walls were very thin, so I heard her when she closed her door and went back into bed, and that was it. She didn't move again. But after that, someone was still walking in the hall. I first thought it was my brother, that I didn't hear him go out of his bedroom, but as I was about to check on him, it stopped, and that's when I heard someone scratching at my door. I still remember the noise. It was slow and loud, and lasted for about a minute. I was too scared to go out. I tried to convince myself it was my brother, but about 5 to 10 minutes after the scratching noise stopped, I heard him leave his bedroom to go to the bathroom, and then returned to sleep, and didn't stir again. At this point I was really confused and afraid. I just couldn't go out of my bedroom anymore. I never checked who or what was behind the door. At some point I fell asleep, only because I was so exhausted. My bedside lamp was still on. I don't know how much sleep I got, but I awoke during the night and my lamp was off. I thought the light bulb had burnt out, but no, someone had switched it off. In the morning, as soon as I went downstairs, my brother came to me and asked if I had heard the noises in the hall during the night, if I heard the footsteps, and if I heard a voice. I told him that I had, except for the voice, and that's when he told me that after he went back to bed, he heard someone whisper his name, but loud enough to wake him, and that's when he saw his door half open, even though he was sure he had closed it. I also asked for the switch, but everyone just looked at me as if I was crazy, and told me that no one went inside my room during the night. When my parents got divorced, we moved into another house with my mum, and now I go to my dad's only every 2 weeks for the weekend. But since we moved, I feel less anxious when I'm at his house, and nothing else happened. The thing is, I still don't understand. Why did my sister never experience anything? Why did it suddenly stop? And obviously, what or who was behind my door that night? My husband and I lived in Centerville for a few years, in a ranch-style house that was built in the 1960s, which had a small-sized crawl space with no insulation, dirt, and spider webs. It also had a typical southern attic that is basically a small standing area of 2x4 rafters and blown insulation. The purpose is simply to store heat, both in the summer and to keep it out of the house, and in winter to keep it from leaving. There were some questionable things about this house, mostly ignorable, just quirks, like bullet holes in the reinforced makeshift metal sheets that covered the windows of the back door in the garage. Little things, features. Anywho, my husband made comments about waking up at night hearing strange loud noises coming from the attic. He said it sounded like a large wooden dresser being dragged across a hardwood floor directly above the master bedroom. Loud, heavy, obvious. My husband also said that one of our dogs, a Catahoula hound, would wake up, jump off the bed, and move to where the sounds started. At this point, his hackles would rise, shoulders lower, and his gaze would focus on the sound. He would then slowly follow the sound, silently stalking it as it made its way across the room. He would follow it directly across the bed, jumping up and walking across both my husband and I as he followed it silently. When the sound finally reached the bathroom door on the far side of the room, the dog would sit, stare upward, and slowly lower his head, as if he were watching something come down from the ceiling. He would then slowly turn his gaze to the left towards a window in the bathroom. At this point, his hackles would lower, and he would gingerly return to bed. According to my husband, this happened regularly. My husband told me about this for 6 months, and for 6 months I thought he was making things up to scare me as a joke. Nope. I woke up hearing this loud scraping noise from above our bed that sounded like a heavy wooden dresser being dragged across a hardwood floor. I reached to shake my husband to wake him up, but he was already awake. He looked over and said, "Just watch the dog." So I did. An old hound dog did exactly what my husband said before. Hackles up, jumped off the bed, and followed the sound, and stopped at the door. He watched, traced the noise, and relaxed and came back to bed. My husband then said, "Told you." About 5 years ago, I worked doing delivery and pickup/removal of furniture and electrical appliances with a charity. I've always been skeptical about the paranormal, but love watching and reading things, and also have a few unexplained things that have happened to myself. But this one time at work creeped me out, and has made me question a lot. So it was a normal day, nothing out of the ordinary until the last job, when we went to pick up some items from a house, and as soon as I walked into the gate I had a feeling of, something's not right here. But I brushed it off as having a long day's work. So we entered the house, me and the other person, and the owner was the nicest woman you could meet, and right away made us feel welcome until she opened the door to the attic, and it was like falling into snow the way the cold hit me so unexpectedly. And I had the feeling someone watching me as I reached the top step and got the image of an old man in my head wearing an old woolen jumper and grey bottoms with slippers. He was pissed. I could feel the anger and the feeling of get out. But again I brushed it off as my imagination, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this house was haunted. And as we were removing the furniture, I kept asking my co-worker, "Dude, can you feel it? This place is haunted." To which he laughed. He was a total non-believer in the paranormal, but as we took the last item out, he made a comment to the owner as a little joke. "Big old house here, huh? There been any ghostly goings-on?" To which she replied without hesitation, like she gets asked every day, "Oh yeah, all the time." To which I dropped to my side and said, "Told you." And she proceeded to tell us about some of the things that have happened. And as we laughed it off and got into the van and started driving away, I got the feeling that someone was watching us even then, even when we pulled up to a red light and waited. My co-worker checked the worksheet, and I read the newspaper, and he wasn't paying attention and missed the light turning green. But as we pulled out, a car ran the other red light and smashed into a passing car. But the car was exactly where we should have been. But my questions are, why did I know? Why did I see this old dude? And what the hell was all that about? I've grown up in different haunted homes. When I was 10, we moved to a house that was built in 1902. 2 stories, and out of the town, an old farmland. Upstairs, there were 3 bedrooms and a large common area. My bedroom didn't have a door for whatever reason, and was in between the other 2. I was laying down in bed facing the door without my glasses on, which, even though I had an awful prescription, I managed to see a girl walk by in what I thought was a nightgown, and called out my sister's name as I thought it was her. The girl didn't even acknowledge me, and just kept on going. When I realized she hadn't acknowledged me, I immediately rolled over to face the wall. The next time something happened was when my twin brother and I were home alone. We were downstairs in the living room, which was directly under the common area upstairs, and we heard heavy pacing back and forth for multiple minutes. We ran and hid, as any scared 11-year-old would, and we told our parents about it, and our dad had also seen things. He'd seen an old man around the house, and then another person outside on the property. We then moved to another home. This one was built in the 50s. It had an attic that was only accessible through a bedroom that had stairs in it. That was my brother's bedroom. My bedroom was the one next to the staircase on the other side. I was in bed and heard the staircase creaking, as if someone was walking up it. I yelled out for my brother to stop because he was keeping me up, and my mum came in and told me that he was in the living room with her. Everyone else was asleep in that house. I never saw actual figures, just dark spots that would move. Then, due to my dad's job, we had to move an hour away. The house was weird. I had to share a walk-in closet with my parents, and I hated that. It freaked me out. My stomach would start churning when I looked at it, and when I had to go in it. It was 10 times worse. I brought it up with my dad, and he told me he could actually see the spirit in the closet, and it wasn't nice. Before my parents split up, we used to live in this huge old house. We lived in that old leaky house until I was around 14. The thought was to renovate the nearly 100-year-old house, but I guess life got in the way for my parents. The house had 2 floors, and all of our bedrooms were up on the 2nd floor. The largest part of the 2nd floor was dominated by the attic. It was a creepy attic filled with discarded things from both our family and the previous owners. I knew the attic pretty well, because although I was terrified of it, me and my best friend would hide things we shouldn't have in there. A stolen baseball bat, fireworks, and other things 10 to 14-year-olds should hide from their parents. The attic had an old wooden door that had a key in it, The door was always locked unless someone was in there. My bedroom shared a wall with this attic. I had insomnia when I was a kid, or at least the doctors told my parents it was insomnia. One of my biggest secrets is that I slept with a nightlight on, hiding under the covers and pillows until I was 14. I would strategize how I would sleep and make it look like the bed was empty by sleeping under the mattress or by having my head under the pillows. The reason? Almost every night I would hear stuff from the attic shift and move. It often sounded like someone was rolling heavy balls or bowling balls across the floor in the attic. Sometimes I would hear knocks on the walls. Sometimes I heard what sounded like whispers. Me and my best friend would sometimes summon the courage to explore the attic in the daytime, always with the door open, never alone. I was obsessed with finding the balls, the ones I heard rolling across the floor. The other sounds I could write off as sounds a house would make, but the rolling balls and the whispers were unexplained. We never found the rolling balls or any other source that could explain it. I'm sure there could be a plausible explanation, but I never found one. I do not believe in the supernatural, but for some reason I still get scared thinking about it. We moved when I was 14, and the first night after we moved, I slept with all the lights off, head on the pillow. I have slept well since. I spoke with my mother about these things a few years ago when I told her about the sounds. She grew a fearful expression and said that she didn't want to talk about it anymore. A friend of mine got a new house. He got a really good deal. It was about $100,000 or something. Really good for a small house. As soon as he moved in, something was off. He lived there with his girlfriend. The first encounter with the noises was when they were inside the house moving in. My friend was going up to the attic to store some extra stuff that wouldn't fit to pawn later. As he was going up the ladder, he heard a scrambling noise. He went up, and a terrible smell hit him. It was a 20-year-old house, and he thought nothing of it. After he went down, he heard something in the attic. He figured it was a rodent, and after a few weeks called an exterminator. The exterminator went up and found a bunch of coke, heroin, and every narcotic you can think of, just sitting there. He called the police and they arrived and searched the house. My friend was cuffed, the house was searched, and in the attic, they found a pipe in the corner leading to the crawl space. They didn't have a crawl space as far as they knew. The cops went back down and searched the house. They eventually found nothing, and my friend took it upon himself to break the base underneath the house. He found a living space with his stuff from the attic, and a guy with long brown hair and a torn hoodie, and my friend's extra shoes. He yelled for the cops, still out front, and got the hell out of there. The cops wanted the man to put his gun down, and he did, and they told him to get in cuffs. He walked over to the hole my friend had broke and accepted fate. He was charged with illegal drug trafficking and sentenced to a year in prison. It still creeps out my friend, even though he moved the hell away from there a few months ago, to know that some drug dealer was hiding in his house for months with a gun. Sometimes, I hear a piano playing in my room. It's not coming from my TV or anywhere else in my house. I don't own a piano or anything like it. It sounds like it's coming from every direction at once, like I can't pinpoint it, but sometimes it leans to the corner of my attic. I've recorded it once, and once a friend started crying after listening to it. Both friends I showed it to said the tune was familiar, and they had played something similar to it before. I also have a mirror in my room. It's just a normal mirror, but when my friends look into it, they usually get really emotional and remember traumatic things. Last time I had both of my friends over, which was just last Friday. One of them was making light of it all and poked at the mirror, and after that it got kind of scary. It felt like something was with us. I felt a hand grab onto my arm, and when I looked at it, saw a small handprint, yet no one was there. One of my friends got scratched on the cheek. The piano music started playing again very loudly, and everyone in the room heard it clearly. We decided to try the Snapchat thing, with the ghost face being picked up by the lens, and I felt something grab onto my shoulder like a kid hiding behind me when I moved it to pick up a face behind me. I was so scared and I screamed. We were all frozen in place for a while, and I began to get irrationally angry at one of the two friends, the one who had been messing with the mirror beforehand. What's so terrifying about this entire thing is this happened one day after rearranging my room, and it's still just as bad when I'm alone now. When we were moving it around, my sister found a cross charm and took it out of the room, so perhaps it's correlated. I actually got the cross back from her on Sunday and put it on the dresser with a weight on it. I just got home after nobody was here all day, and it disappeared. I'm scared. I feel like I'm constantly being watched and seeing things out of the corner of my eye. I live in an old house, originally built in 1919, but has had 2 additions built on. To give context, in the main level there's the living room, kitchen, bathroom, office and bedroom, with a laundry room in the basement. The office used to be a bedroom, but we put stairs into the attic in that room. The areas that are the attic, bedroom and living room are the original 1919 portions of the house. I have always had a weird vibe in that place. My husband and I bought it in spring of 2006, did a lot of renovations and moved in that fall. The attic bedroom was started in 2009 and finished in 2012. The house has always made noises, but old houses do, so not too strange. But recently, I have heard what sounds like running or falling down sounds coming from the attic room. I am a night owl and stayed up until 2 or 3 a.m. on most weekends. Last Saturday, I was in my living room reading when I heard a crashing noise from my bedroom. I ran up the stairs, and my husband was sound asleep in bed. I looked around, went back downstairs, checked on my kids in their room, and both were asleep. I sat down and started reading again. About 20 minutes later, it sounded like someone jumped 3 times in the attic room directly above me. I ran up again. Same thing. Everyone was asleep. No one had moved. After this, I went back to the living room, grabbed my phone, and just went to bed. I didn't have any scared feelings, just felt curious. I casually mentioned it to my husband Sunday morning, and one of my daughters heard me. We all commented that it was strange. Today, my daughter told me she heard it in the morning as she was getting ready for school. I think there's something up there in the attic. My parents' house has an attic. My brother and I were always forbidden from going up there because apparently we were prone to falling down the stairs and hurting our heads. As a child, this is something you'd believe. However, when we moved out and got lives of our own, our parents started inviting us back home for the holidays. It was around Thanksgiving, and I had come home for a few days to see my parents and catch up, just before Thanksgiving Day. My mother likes to put out the Christmas decorations the day after Thanksgiving. So, she asks me now that I'm older if I wouldn't mind going up the ladder into the attic and helping her get the things she needs from there. I, of course, willingly oblige. I make my way up there and see the box of decorations. I take a moment to take in the attic, a place that for so long I had been not allowed to go into, always seeing it as this dark and sinister place. But it was just an ordinary attic. In the corner, though, something catches my eye. I thought I saw movement. I turn my head, and at that moment I swear I saw a person move into the wall. I just about fall from the stairs and manage to catch myself, my mother running into the room at that moment and asking me if I was okay. I look at her and say I think I saw something in the attic. Then she turns to me with a blank stare on her face and says, "And that's why you were never allowed up as children." Still creeps me out to this day, and I have never gone back up to that attic since. I went to bed early today because I exercised twice and felt my body was really tired. I woke up a few times, but everything was fine. Just a normal night, as I sleep in the attic. But then I woke up at 3:30 feeling very cold and kind of ill. I grabbed another blanket and tried going to sleep again. When I almost fell asleep, I heard a little boy's voice laughing in my ear. I instantly felt paralyzed and heard him running away. I wanted to scream, but I just couldn't get anything out of my mouth. After a few seconds, I calmed down with the thoughts that it could have been my little brother doing a sick prank or something, but I knew he would never do something like that. But I needed some idea to not make me go crazy at that moment. After getting control of my body again, I turned on the lights and just sat on my bed thinking about what had happened. Maybe it was just the fact that my body was cold and exhausted, and that I almost fell asleep and started imagining things. This would not have been my first encounter with something paranormal while sleeping in the attic. I also had a period where I had a lot of sleep paralysis, but never while sleeping in the attic. To come back to the idea that my little brother tried to scare me or something, to get into the attic you need to open a hatch and slide the stairs down, very old school. Every night before going to bed, I bring up the stairs and close this hatch. So even if it was my little brother, the noise of opening the hatch and everything would have woken me up. I also heard someone running away, and there were no places to hide. Nor would he have had enough time to go downstairs and close the hatch again, which would have made a lot of noise. When I was 7 or 8 years old, my brothers and I, along with some other kids from the neighborhood, were playing our own version of hide and seek. It was my turn to seek, so I had to go inside the house to cover my eyes and count to 100. Nobody could see me in there while they were hiding, so I decided to cheat. I went upstairs and started looking out the window to see where everyone was hiding. When I got into my older brother's room, I looked out the window. I had just got done counting to 100, so I had to get back downstairs fast. I looked out the window really quick and then turned around to head out. Above the door I saw a little flash of light. Then the door slammed shut. I immediately looked over at the attic door that was in that room. I heard something moving in there, so I backed up as far away from the door as I could get. With my back against the wall, feeling trapped there, I heard a loud growl come from inside the attic. I tried to scream, but I was so scared that I couldn't. I just stood there motionless, waiting for whatever it was to get me. Within seconds, my brother opened the door and began yelling at me for being in his room. I ran right past him and straight out. I didn't tell anyone what had just happened. They wouldn't have believed me anyway. When I was in high school, the house we lived in generally had odd things happen to it. Our cat would freak out and stare at the cabinet, as my mum had porcelain dolls, and the dolls' heads would frequently be facing different directions than where they were placed. The pull chain on the ceiling fan would click, and strange things like that would happen. My room in particular was right next to the attic stairs. They ascended over my closet, and I would quite often hear what sounded like scratching behind the wall where the stairwell was, and footsteps right above my room in the attic. Easy small animals getting in the attic, right? We found a small child's bed hidden away in the corner of the attic. When we asked the neighbors, we found that the old owners had a small child that passed away. One night I was home alone, and was about 16 at the time, and I heard what sounded like a closed door bouncing against the doorframe. I went upstairs, because the only possible closed door would be the attic. Sure enough, it was bouncing back and forth against the frame. But that wasn't it. The door handle was jiggling and turning back and forth as the door bounced. I did the only logical thing at that point, shoved the ironing board against the door and sprinted down the stairs, out the back door, and went to my neighbor's house until my mum came home. This incident happened a few years ago. It was around 9 p.m. Me, my mum, and my sister were getting ready for bed. It was around the middle of summer, so it was a hot night. My sister was sleeping in the living room because her room was too hot to sleep in, which was normal for us to do. We all say our goodnights and head for bed. 5 minutes later, my mother wakes me in a panic, with my sister clutching to her side. My mum tells me to get a bat and search the house for any intruders, so I did. I found nothing, doing a very thorough search, and I come back into the living room and ask what happened. My sister kept hearing a voice that said in a very threatening way, "There is no escape." Keep in mind, our family are hard believers in the paranormal. We also are Wiccan, and we have a protective barrier around our house, so there's no way an evil spirit could have gotten in. The next day we went out and brought sage and other herbs to cleanse our house, and since then, we've never had another experience. To this day I'm still afraid of our house. The only spirits left in the house is an old man that lives in the attic, though he's a friendly spirit, so I doubt it would have been him. My only other explanation is that an evil spirit threw its voice through the barrier and into the living room, but that wouldn't explain how we haven't had any other problems.